From the moment you glimpse the grand iron gates of the Chamberlain estate, you feel the weight of its ambition. Towering pillars of white marble rise on either side, etched with the family crest, a sheaf of cotton bowls crowned by a quill, while a long, gravel drive stretches out, flanked by perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. The mansion itself stands 3 stories tall, its stately columns and pillared veranda evoking the classical age, yet somehow carrying an air of overwrought opulence. At dusk, the lanterns along the veranda cast long, flickering shadows across the polished porches, creating an almost theatrical interplay of light and dark, as if to remind you that nothing here is as it seems. Inside, the parlor dazzles with Venetian mirrors and French silks. A grand piano, its ebony surface immaculately polished, perches beneath a frescoed ceiling depicting mythic scenes of cotton harvesting angels hovering over fields of ghostly white. Gilded portraits line the walls, each Chamberlain ancestor frozen in formal poses, jaw set, eyes stern, bearing witness to the dynasty's rise. Their glossy frames glow under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, and every careful detail reinforces the narrative of genteel prosperity. Visitors compliment the family on their taste, praise their cultural refinement, and leave believing the Chamberlains to be paragons of Southern aristocracy. But beyond the perfumed air of the drawing room, behind the mahogany doors of the library where shelves groan with leather-bound ledgers, the cost of that refinement is recorded in cold, unfeeling ink. Here, the margins of account books are dotted with shorthand notations, wages withheld, disappearances, fields expanded. The numbers are clinical, 73 laborers, names lost, replaced by codes. No tribute to their toil, no gravestones to mark their passing, just row upon row of figures, tallying cotton bales against human lives. Outside, the cotton fields roll on for acres, a sea of pale bowls that glint under the sun's relentless glare. By day, workers, many barely past childhood, bend over the row after row, their hands raw and bleeding from the thorny stalks. Their song is the rhythm of survival, no hymns, no laughter, only the scratch of hoe against soil. Supervisors in crisp linen guide them with whip and word, ensuring each stalk yields its maximum profit. Come evening, the fields empty out, save for flickering lanterns lining the boundary, a silent reminder that escape is a fantasy. Visitors who pass through the estate gates today see only manicured lawns and the occasional glimmer of a lantern in the distant peonage camps. They hear rumors of lavish soirees in the ballroom, tales of silk gowns and orchestras playing beneath frescoed ceilings. They admire the Chamberlain's generosity, to the local church, to nearby schools, never suspecting that these gifts are but a thin veneer, a calculated effort to bury the estate's darker ledger entries under a blanket of public goodwill. Rumors do swirl among the servants' quarters, whispered at twilight behind closed shutters. Tales of midnight burials, of bodies lowered into unmarked pits beyond the grove of oak trees that line the far horizon. But these stories are dismissed by the elite as superstition, concocted by those jealous of the family's success. One by one, dissenters vanish, dispatched to those same graves where footprints fade into silent red clay. No judge has ever seen the evidence, and no jury ever convened, for the Chamberlain's influence stretches far beyond the gates of their own domain. Still, the mansion rears its proud columns against the sky, a monument to cotton, wealth, and authority. Lanterns burn every night along the veranda, candles flicker in the salon windows, and somewhere, tucked behind velvet drapes, the Chamberlain patriarch traces his finger along the margins of a ledger, satisfied by each new calculation. The estate remains a beacon of southern grandeur, its splendor unblemished to all but a few. And yet, beneath that beauty, the weight of buried guilt presses on, restless and unforgotten. They were never meant to be remembered. The 73 souls who once tilled the Chamberlain cotton fields, whose backs bore the weight of an empire, left behind no headstones, no burial records, not even initials scratched into wood. Their names were never written in family Bibles, never spoken from pulpits, never engraved into cemetery gates. They were referred to only in whispers, if at all, the hands, the help, the ones who came and went. Their graves lie scattered beneath the mossy soil just beyond the orchard's edge, swallowed by time and silence, unmarked and intentionally hidden beneath a veil of curated landscape. The official maps of the Chamberlain estate make no mention of the burial plots. Where there should be a cemetery or even a field designated for laborers' rest, there is instead a patch of old sycamore and sweet gum trees, conveniently labeled as unused farmland. But the ground tells a different story. The soil dips irregularly there, as if the earth has sagged under the weight of memory. Dogs often refuse to cross it, and the older workers, those who remember, avert their eyes when passing. To them, it is not forgotten ground, but forbidden ground. Each of the 73 worked the fields under the boiling Tennessee sun, pulling the cotton that bought the chandeliers, the books, the imported wallpaper, the casks of Madeira in the cellar. Many of them had no kin. Some had fled violence, poverty, or even bondage, seeking honest labor in a place that promised wages. But what they found was a closed system built on fear, debt, and silence. They worked from dawn to dusk, lodged in crude bunkhouses beyond the fields, paid in credit vouchers redeemable only at the company store. When they fell ill, they disappeared. When they spoke out, they vanished. No one came to ask questions. No one dared. The Chamberlain family took meticulous care with every inch of their public image, but paid no mind to recording the fates of those who labored unseen. These workers were not part of the family tree, not subjects of oil portraits, not remembered in any diary or memoir. When one of them died, it was handled quietly. A small group of men, summoned after sundown, would wrap the body in old burlap or sackcloth. No clergy. No ceremony. Just a shallow grave dug by lantern light. Sometimes, to a pit if there was a fever outbreak or a machinery accident that mangled too much to bury in one. The tools used for those burials, wooden shovels, a broken wheelbarrow, a rusted lantern, still lie hidden in the brush, swallowed by the creeping undergrowth. The workers knew not to speak of them. The estate foreman made sure of it. He reminded them, time and again, that questions led to trouble. And trouble led to the same fate. So silence reigned. Mothers never got letters. Brothers never found closure. Townsfolk assumed they had moved on. It was easier that way, for everyone except the dead. To the Chamberlains, the loss of a field hand was a line in an account book, a minor disruption in production. Sometimes a replacement would be brought in from a neighboring county. Sometimes the gap would simply be filled by someone already there, working double shifts without acknowledgement. Life on the estate went on as though nothing had happened. Dinners were held. Horses groomed. White gloves laundered. No one in the family paused to mourn or question. The disappearance of a worker was as common, and as unremarkable, as a ruined crop or a broken plow. A few of the younger descendants, in later years, asked about the stories. They heard things, old rumors of deaths and disappearances, of burials carried out by moonlight. But their inquiries were quickly redirected. "Don't dig up old dirt," an uncle might say, or, "Our name doesn't belong in those stories." So the younger ones stopped asking. The family archives remained sanitized, the family name polished, their legacy carefully curated. The names of those 73 remained in the shadows. Even among the local townspeople, the stories are told only in fragments now. An older man might point toward the orchard and mutter, "Bad things happened out there." A former field hand's granddaughter might say her kin went to work at the Chamberlain place and never came back. But no one can produce a document, no one can show you a cross. The graves are real, but invisible, erased from every official record, hidden beneath a silence that has held for over a century. The Chamberlain family's wealth was the kind that glittered from a distance. Their cotton profits built not only their manor but an entire narrative, a story of entrepreneurial success, southern grit, and refined legacy. The ledgers they kept were careful and clean, always showing growth, always presenting solvency. Yet hidden between those tidy lines of financial triumph was a truth rarely spoken aloud: every dollar earned was soaked in silence, and every gain was balanced against the brutal cost of keeping others voiceless. Cotton was king in Tennessee, and the Chamberlains were its loyal stewards. They expanded their fields aggressively, year after year, often acquiring nearby plots not through market purchase but through defaulted debts. They extended high-interest credit to smaller farmers and, when repayment proved impossible, absorbed their land. This gave them more acreage, more yield, and more need for cheap, disposable labor. The business model was designed for scale, not sustainability. Workers were interchangeable, their injuries inconsequential, their deaths little more than operational inconveniences. As the cotton yields rose, so did the family's reputation. They became known not just for their wealth but for their philanthropy. Donations to local schools, endowments to churches, sponsorships of town festivals, all of it was heavily publicized. The Chamberlains were masters of the performance. At town hall meetings, they spoke of opportunity. At Sunday services, they appeared devout, seated front row in tailored suits and pastel gloves, eyes downcast during prayers for the poor. No one questioned how the poor came to be that way. No one dared ask who was buried at the edge of the Chamberlain property. Behind closed doors, the workers' conditions bordered on bondage. Most of them were caught in a cycle of debt peonage, lured in by promises of decent wages and fair treatment, only to find themselves bound to the company store, their paychecks eaten away by inflated costs of housing, food, and equipment. Even minor violations, a broken tool, a missed shift due to illness, could incur steep fines. The system ensured that no one left with savings, and few left at all. When someone resisted or tried to leave, they were branded as trouble and dealt with accordingly. The silence surrounding this system was not accidental, it was cultivated. Supervisors and foremen were trained not just to enforce labor but to suppress unrest. Informants were planted within the workers' camps, and rumors of escape or rebellion were crushed before they could take form. Those who tried to expose the truth met swift consequences: disappearance, expulsion, or, more often, death that no one officially recorded. The workers themselves learned quickly what could and could not be said. They developed a language of glances, silences, and gestures. Trust was rare. Secrets were necessary. Profit soared with each passing season. The Chamberlains invested in machinery, expanded into textile processing, and even opened a rail depot to ship their cotton directly to eastern mills. They were celebrated in business circles, invited to exclusive social clubs, quoted in economic journals. Their wealth became a model for post-war Southern recovery, held up as evidence that dignity and commerce could coexist. But there was no dignity in the bloodied hands that picked their cotton, no honor in the way they buried the ones who broke under the strain. To maintain their pristine image, the family employed lawyers, notaries, and accountants whose job was not only to manage money but to conceal its origins. Deaths among the laborers were rarely reported to county authorities. When questions arose from neighboring farms or occasional journalists, the answers were always the same: transient laborers, untraceable histories, false names. Any physical evidence of abuse was erased, any dissenting voices discredited. The Chamberlains didn't merely buy land and cotton, they bought silence. Their wealth allowed them to shape not just perception, but memory. They funded historical societies, curated their family archives, and even commissioned local writers to produce sanitized family biographies. They framed their story as one of triumph against hardship, as if their success emerged solely from hard work and God's favor. The 73 unmarked graves scattered across their land were not mentioned in these narratives. The laborers' suffering was edited out, written over by tales of civic virtue and genteel refinement. Even today, visitors to the Chamberlain estate are handed brochures that speak of agricultural innovation and regional pride. The tours follow polished routes, passing parlors and libraries, stopping at the estate's private chapel with its stained-glass saints. The guide's voice never wavers. There is no mention of the camps, no hint of how much was silenced to preserve the illusion. The cotton profits were not stained just by sweat, but by a deliberate, institutional silence that stretched from the soil to the courthouse, from the bunkhouses to the pages of history. The Chamberlain name was spoken with reverence in the parlors of Tennessee society. In local newspapers, they were described as patrons of the arts, stewards of progress, and pillars of Christian charity. Their annual donations to churches funded new pews and stained-glass windows. Their endowments built libraries, sponsored scholarships, and even financed a local hospital wing. At town galas, they arrived in polished carriages, dressed in imported fabrics, their every move followed by admiring eyes. The Chamberlain patriarch sat on civic boards. The matriarch led charitable committees. To the outside world, they appeared to be the very definition of benevolent aristocracy. But behind that polished exterior lay a darkness too deliberate to be accidental. Their reputation for generosity and public virtue was not a byproduct of success, it was a carefully constructed mask, designed to conceal the brutality that built their empire. For every dollar donated, there were bodies buried. For every plaque that bore their name, there were lives crushed beneath their silence. Their philanthropy wasn't kindness, it was a strategy. The Chamberlains understood that to control perception was to control power. Their wealth came from cotton, and cotton came from labor, unseen, unpaid, and often involuntary. The workers in their fields were invisible to the society that praised them. They lived in isolated camps, shunted to the edges of the property, kept out of sight and far from town. When they entered the estate's main grounds, it was under supervision, their heads bowed, their silence enforced. No one attending the Chamberlain garden parties ever asked where the cotton came from, or who picked it. When rumors of mistreatment began to surface, stories of abuse, disappearances, buried bodies, the Chamberlains responded not with transparency, but with spectacle. They funded elaborate community projects, commissioned public art, and hosted charity auctions that drew the elite from counties away. Each event served as both distraction and propaganda, reinforcing the narrative of the family as generous caretakers of the region. Their money flowed into every corner of civic life, binding their name to hospitals, schools, and churches. To question the Chamberlains was to question the institutions they propped up, and few dared to risk such isolation. Their private cruelty was meticulous. Workers who spoke out were punished quietly, away from town eyes. Beatings were delivered by foremen in barns or behind tool sheds. If someone disappeared, the Chamberlains had an explanation ready: an illness, a runaway, a transfer to another property. Records were altered or destroyed. Even the coroner, whose duty was to investigate suspicious deaths, received donations for his office from the Chamberlain Trust. The system of silence ran deep. Even within their own household, the truth was compartmentalized. The family's children were raised with stories of legacy and pride, taught to recite the names of ancestors and repeat the values of hard work and stewardship. The brutal realities of the cotton fields were kept from them, or justified in vague moral terms: order, discipline, necessity. If a young Chamberlain asked about the workers or the stories whispered in town, they were met with firm correction. "Our family helps this community," they were told. "Don't listen to jealous people." The workers, meanwhile, were trapped. Many were indebted beyond escape, caught in the vicious loop of peonage that guaranteed their labor for years, sometimes lifetimes. Those who tried to leave faced threats or retaliation. Some were forcibly returned. Others vanished. Their families received no compensation, no letters, no graves to mourn beside. Their names never appeared in public records, their stories never told in court. The Chamberlains ensured that no voice could rise above the hush they imposed. What made the Chamberlains so dangerous was not only their wealth, but their control of the narrative. They had the power to erase the suffering they caused while presenting themselves as moral leaders. They spoke at graduations and baptisms, hosted clergy at their estate, and gave interviews in which they praised the virtues of family and faith. They were photographed holding orphan children, handing out bread at holiday drives, cutting ribbons at hospital openings. These images were carefully staged and widely circulated, reinforcing the illusion of their nobility. Behind every gesture of kindness was a calculation. Their public acts of charity bought silence, suppressed scrutiny, and garnered loyalty. Anyone who questioned them risked losing employment, housing, or social standing. Even local journalists knew to steer clear. Stories that hinted at controversy were quickly pulled, editors reminded of the Chamberlain's influence. The family's wealth insulated them from consequence, their public benevolence acting as both shield and weapon. In time, the Chamberlains became inseparable from the town's identity. Their name adorned school auditoriums, their portraits hung in courthouses, their story told as one of resilience and progress. No mention was made of the 73 graves. No monument marked the lives of those who built the legacy. The dynasty's public generosity was built, brick by brick, on the silencing of truth. There were no official documents that marked the end of a life on the Chamberlain estate. No death certificates filed, no notices in the local paper, no undertakers called in the night. When a worker died, whether from exhaustion, accident, illness, or punishment, the event was recorded only in whispers and buried swiftly beneath a blanket of secrecy. The Chamberlains didn't need a cemetery. They needed land that no one would ask about, places where graves could be dug and forgotten. So they chose the back grove beyond the east cotton fields, a patch of ground tucked behind a curtain of cedar and sycamore, where shadows lingered longer and birds rarely sang. The grove was never fenced, never marked. A visitor would pass it without noticing the gentle depressions in the soil, the unnatural pattern of flattened earth. It was quiet there, not the peace of rest, but the absence of acknowledgement. The men assigned to burial duty never spoke of it. They received no written orders, only a nod from a foreman and a burlap sack handed to them with a grim silence. The burials were always at night, always without prayer, always without names. The dead were laid down in shallow trenches and covered in haste, the ground patted down with shovels that left no mound, no cross, no stone. The tools used in these burials were hidden as carefully as the bodies themselves. A rusted wheelbarrow was kept behind the old smokehouse, its handles worn smooth from years of silent use. The shovels, splintered and worn, were stacked in a loose pile beneath a false floorboard in the storage barn. A lantern with a broken glass chimney was reserved only for these nights, its light dim and flickering, never enough to draw attention. These items were never used during the day, never seen by visitors, never discussed openly by the workers. They were instruments of disappearance, kept out of sight and memory. The men who performed the burials were not executioners, but laborers like the rest, caught in the same system of debt and fear, following orders because refusal meant becoming the next body buried. Some tried to mark the graves discreetly, a small pile of rocks, a twist of vine around a tree, a notch carved into bark. But these gestures of humanity were often discovered and removed. The Chamberlains demanded a pristine landscape, and any evidence of unrest, especially death, was treated as a threat to their image. The foreman patrolled the grove from time to time, ensuring that the dead stayed hidden and that the land remained indistinguishable from the rest. The workers learned early not to speak of the grove. Children were told to stay away, not because of ghosts, but because proximity invited scrutiny. Older laborers refused to even look in its direction. Stories circulated in hushed tones, of a man who asked too many questions and vanished, of a woman who tried to find her brother's grave and was dismissed without notice, of a boy caught lingering near the trees and beaten until he could no longer walk straight. These were warnings more than stories, methods of survival passed down in silence. Every now and then, someone from outside the estate would notice something. A trader, perhaps, passing by with goods, might ask about the strange clearing, or a preacher from town might wonder why so many young men came to the estate and never seemed to leave. These questions were met with polite deflection or firm dismissal. The Chamberlains knew how to handle curiosity. A donation to a church fund, a favor extended to a town official, a whispered reminder of debts owed. The inquiries would cease, and the land would remain undisturbed. The records that might have exposed the truth were either never created or deliberately destroyed. Payroll logs omitted the names of those who disappeared. Medical records were falsified or left blank. Letters sent home by workers were often intercepted, rewritten, or discarded. No graves meant no mourning, and no mourning meant no accountability. The Chamberlains relied on this erasure as much as they relied on the cotton crop itself. It was part of the machinery, just another cog in the system. The silence surrounding the graves wasn't accidental, it was enforced. The family's influence reached into the county clerk's office, the sheriff's department, the local press. If anyone had tried to investigate, they would have found locked doors, lost files, and frightened witnesses. The few who dared dig, literally or figuratively, were either bought off or quietly pushed out of town. The grove remained untouched, not because it was sacred, but because it was protected by power. Today, the land still looks ordinary. Trees sway in the wind, vines climb the trunks, and deer occasionally cross through the underbrush. To a stranger, it's just another piece of the sprawling Chamberlain estate. There are no markers, no flowers, no names spoken aloud. The field hands who died there have no descendants who visit, no sermons said in their honor. They were buried not just to be forgotten, but to be denied. The wind that blows through the back edge of the Chamberlain estate carries a sound that isn't quite the rustle of leaves. Locals say the grove whispers. Some say it's just the wind slipping through the hollow trunks of old cedar. Others insist it's the breath of something buried but not at rest. Though the official records remain silent and the landscape seems unremarkable, there's a weight in the soil, a pressure that makes the air feel thicker, the ground feel softer beneath the foot. Those who know where to look avoid the place entirely. Those who don't often stumble into it unaware, only to walk away feeling as though they've disturbed something that never wanted to be touched again. Workers still assigned to the estate in the years following the burials always warned newcomers, don't linger past sunset near the orchard's edge. Don't whistle when you pass the sycamores. Don't dig, don't talk loud, and never ask what's underneath the grove. These weren't superstitions passed down from folklore, they were protections, the only safeguards the living could offer in a place where no protections had ever been given before. Something had settled there in the ground with the 73, something that hadn't found closure. Over the years, the Chamberlain family hosted garden parties just yards from where the unmarked graves lay. White linens fluttered in the breeze, crystal glasses clinked over laughter, and the scent of roast duck and magnolias filled the air. But the workers preparing the grounds for those events often claimed to hear things when they raked the soil, soft knocks beneath their boots, the sound of breathing when no one was nearby, the strange chill that came on even in the heat of July. One older groundskeeper, long since dismissed, once swore that he'd seen a line of small handprints in the dirt along the edge of the orchard, perfectly spaced and freshly pressed, though no child had been on the estate for days. There were efforts over time to rework the land, to cultivate it into something new. One Chamberlain heir proposed turning the grove into a vineyard. The soil was tested, maps were drawn, and a team of laborers sent in with shovels to prepare the earth. But the project was abruptly abandoned. The heir refused to discuss why. One of the workers, who later left the state entirely, told a reporter that on the third day of clearing, a man's rusted belt buckle was uncovered alongside remnants of a rotted burlap sack, and the next morning, the crew found every tool they'd left behind stacked neatly in the shape of a cross. Historians who've looked into the Chamberlain estate's early labor history always hit the same wall: missing documents, lost census records, accounts that skip entire seasons. The plantation's business ledgers are clean, almost too clean, showing no sudden dips in production even during periods when nearby estates struggled. There are no recorded epidemics, no incidents of mass dismissal, no explanations for why 73 laborers, each contracted, fed, and quartered, would simply vanish. But the gaps in the paperwork aren't blank spaces. They're voids that echo. The harder one looks, the more apparent it becomes that the silence itself was engineered. The town surrounding the Chamberlain estate has changed over the decades. New businesses have opened. Schools have been rebuilt. Families have come and gone. But the rumors persist, passed in low voices at barbershops, murmured across pews during funeral services, scribbled in the margins of old library books no one borrows anymore. Some claim the land itself refuses to forget. Rain falls harder there, they say. Trees don't grow straight. And some nights, when the moon is low and the wind moves just right, you can hear footsteps on gravel where no one is walking. Even descendants of the workers, those few who remain and speak cautiously about the past, will sometimes mention the dreams. Generations later, they still have them, the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, of being buried in warm soil, of screaming with no sound. These dreams are described almost identically by people who have never met, never shared a story, never visited the grove. They speak of lantern light in the distance, of a man with no face standing near the trees, of voices repeating the same phrase, "Remember us." The Chamberlains never acknowledged any of it. When questioned in public or in private, they leaned on their legacy, their philanthropy, their wealth. The family line thinned over the years, and most of the descendants moved north, leaving the estate in the hands of caretakers and historical societies. Yet even now, tour guides avoid walking near the sycamore grove when showing visitors around. Paths are routed wide around the area. Brochures show the orchard from a distance but include no photographs taken within it. Whatever lingers in the soil is not something time has washed away. It exists between the lines of history, in the spaces where names should be, in the hollows of trees that grew over bones. There are places on the Chamberlain land where no birds nest, where grass grows too fast or not at all, where children instinctively fall silent without knowing why. The 73 were buried without ceremony, without record, without dignity, but not without a trace. 1.